Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparutade sangamatassa tawara Sodavantaba munjantu satang. So this afternoon is the occasion to reflect on the way it is. As I've informed you many times, that I hope I'm not preaching, but just reflecting. Because I'm in a position of being able to preach, but I don't want to be a preacher. And so, because the Buddhist teachings are always pointing at the way it is, rather than telling you and describing the way it is for you to believe or disbelieve. So believing is where we tend to just take what we're informed and forced to believe in. So institutions, identity with gender, with nationality, with race, are all beliefs that we've been told that what we are these very limited forms. So then there's a conflict because we don't have the same conditioning, and we have different karmic backgrounds. So on the individual level, we're very different. On the Dhamma level, we're one, complete and perfect. So as Buddhists, this ceremony of taking refuge in the Dhamma, you can believe in the Dhamma or what monks or scholars tell you the Dhamma is. But the reflective ability is the Dhamma is apparent here and now. So it's not something to believe, but to just wake up to. It's like this. You don't have to search for it or define it. As soon as you try to describe here and now, what do you say? Mind goes rather blank, at least mine does. If I say, describe apparent here and now for me, I wouldn't know where to begin. My thinking mind stops. So in Dhamma we're one, wherein forms are all different. And all the problems of the world are caused through the identity with the forms, because we identify with the body, with our cultural conditioning, social conditioning, religious conditioning, and it's not the same. Nobody is acculturated or conditioned in the same way. So then there's conflicts about who's right and who's wrong. So there's this subject of right and wrong, good and bad, sin and virtue. So it's interesting living in a Dhamma community because we're encouraged to wake up to the here and now rather than telling you to be a Buddhist you have to believe in something. I've heard lay Buddhists tell me that you had to believe in the law of karma and in no self to be a Buddhist, and you've got to keep the 5 precepts. So that's a kind of strong view of how to be a Buddhist. But if I tell you have to believe in karma or in no self or in the 5 precepts, then you might believe me and try to do that. But you're not awakened to what karma is, the 5 precepts, how to use them. No self is like annihilation. If I'm not this body, not this person, then who am I? Because my whole life's been spent identifying, being told that I'm this person, this form, this character. So remember, when we're born, we have a form and we're conscious, but we don't have an identity yet. That comes later. So all our identities are given to us through culture, through parent conditioning, through religion. We get this identity from what our mother thinks about us, or our relationship to our father, to our community, to our race. And so waking up is to begin to see that, is this wrong or right? And then we start thinking that it shouldn't be like that, but that's the way it is. The samsara is like this. It's not about ultimate reality. Samsara is illusory. It's about forms that are not awake, that tend to identify with the conditioning they get from their parents, their culture, their religion. So the Buddha's teaching are pointing at that for us to, are you really what you think you are? I'm not saying you're nobody, because then from the ordinary thinking mind, that means, doesn't mean much. I have to be somebody. Or we might think we're nobody if we kind of disparage ourselves, criticize ourselves. So we have different qualities, like some are very intellectual, very intelligent in the IQ spectrum, very gifted with thinking, reason, and logic. And so that's easy to identify with. I know what's right and wrong because I'm so intelligent. I know how to run Amaravati because I'm so intelligent. And so we can always think of a better way to run a monastery by thinking of reasonable thoughts, sensible superlatives, ideals of how it should be. Then there's the heart level, the emotional level. We're very sensitive, emotional creatures. This samsara is all about feeling. It's not about absolutes, right and wrong, perfection and form. It's like this, the First Noble Truth of suffering is about samsara, clinging to forms, to things that change and we have very little control over. Emotions oftentimes are, we like reason and logic because it's it doesn't feel. The intellect has no feeling. It has ideas, ideals, but it doesn't feel anything. So then we point at the heart, and not the kind of organ of the heart, but this is where you feel emotion. To be broken-hearted, you feel here, you don't feel it in your brain. And so life is an emotional experience. And yet we can think on a reasonable level, we think, don't be emotional, be reasonable. Which is advice we often get when we're caught in an emotion. Don't make a scene, be reasonable, stiff upper lip, bear with it, all kinds of advice on, don't show emotion because oftentimes we're embarrassed by our emotions. Because so many of us who have been educated have this idea that reason and logic are our refuge and emotion is weakness. But when you start investigating life, you begin to see it's about emotion, which isn't reasonable. But it's here and now, it's about feeling and our identity with the conditions that we're emotional about, with the forms, with our personality, with our class, with our gender. So there's the heart level, which is very intuitive, and the intellectual level, which is always about absolutes, right, how things should be, what is the best idea, what is better than, is my view better than yours? So I can hold firmly to my view that my view of Amaravati is right. And I can cling to that view without understanding how my inveterate grasping is upsetting people. Because being right is better than anything else. Where if we just grasp ideals, we lose our intuitive abilities. We tend to bypass that because we are so convinced that reason, logic, and education and knowledge is the best. So the Buddha in his teaching is always pointing to this grasping. Not that ideals are good or bad, not judgmental. Conscious awareness isn't judgmental. It's not about absolute right and wrong, good and bad. It's pointing to right and wrong, good and bad are concepts, perceptions that we grasp. And we don't know we're grasping because we're convinced we're right. Then there's the doubters who think maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've got it wrong, and because they're grasping an ideal, but they don't have that conviction of firmly grasping an ideal and trying to compel everybody to go along with it. So in vipassana, which means investigating, it's all about finding out for yourself. So the teachings are pointing at that, trying to encourage a kind of marvelous investigation of life that many of us really found enlightening, to investigate life, not just to go along with the conditions that I acquired through my social background, my family, my culture, my education, but to go much deeper than that, than just ideals. I know how we can all create an ideal monastery with our intellect. And sometimes I've tried to do that in the early years of wanting to have the perfect monastery and according to my ideals of what I felt would be better than any other monastery. But through investigating that and seeing the total confusion it caused all the other people surrounding me, I wasn't aware of the here and now, of the way it is. I was just trying to force the situation to fit an idea that I was grasping. And it's this investigation of grasping. Maybe it is a good idea. It's not that they're wrong or right, but it's the grasping of ideas. Ideas are ephemeral. They're empty phenomena. There's nothing solid or absolute about an ideal. Samsara, these bodies, this society we live in, this planet, this universe that we are part of, is not perfect. Its very nature is to change. So what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, what we think, what we feel is about change. You can't sustain a condition whose very nature is to change, and all conditions are impermanent. So that's the clue, the Sape Sankhara Anicca, the Buddhist teaching, wisdom teaching. All conditions are impermanent. And through investigation, I found that just taking that one teaching and investigating, is there something permanent? Is there a condition that's permanent? And then my intellect would say, well, in the scriptures it said all conditions are impermanent, so they're impermanent. But then to challenge myself, because I had faith and respect for the scriptures, for the Ajahns teaching and so forth, but which was important. But the scriptures and the Ajahns tend to, their whole point is not at themselves. Grasping the Tripitaka as your refuge is ignorance. You can't take refuge in a book. Books are written by human beings who use words, and all words, whether they're sacred or vulgar or what, are impermanent conditions. And so to find out for yourself who you really are, you investigate to really not leave anything out. Emotions are impermanent, ideals are impermanent, good is impermanent, bad is impermanent. And that's an observation. It's not just believing because the Buddha said that. He didn't kind of make that into a doctrine to grasp, but an encouragement to investigate. Is there something that's permanent? And then you investigate. So through this investigation, you go through your own thoughts, memories, emotional habits, identities, all the cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, letting it go. And what's left when you've let go of everything? You're still conscious. When you've let go of everything, then you realize the Dhamma is apparent here and now. And the thing that blinds us in the here and now is our grasping of ideas, of views, of opinions, perceptions. So the heart level is like intuition. It's not trying to just be justifying emotional habits, but realizing emotions are part of the feeling, is a sensitivity that we have to experience through the form, through the senses, through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, through the body, through the mind. So Sape Sankara Anicca is a wisdom teaching, meaning it's not pointing at itself as something to grasp, but to find out for yourself, is that right or wrong? Is that when you've actually let go of all phenomena, all your views and opinions, your identities, personal, emotional, gender identities, when you let go of everything, what's left when you let go of samsara? And that's nibbana. So as long as we grasp blindly, that means it's not even saying grasping is wrong, because we have to grasp things in this form. But this ignorant grasping of conditions, of forms, of views and opinions, without investigation, just out of the force of habit or ignorance or confusion. So avijja, or ignorance of Dhamma, not awakened to the apparent here and now reality that we're all experiencing, whether we're aware of it or not, is not the issue. So we get caught in the habits we've developed of thinking, of perception, of identity, of political views, religious views. And then we suffer from that. So samsara is about suffering, because these forms are very unstable. Look at your own body. You know how impermanent it is. How sensitive a form is, so delicate a form, living in a vast universe. There's one little male or female walking around the planet, and it's subject to so many things, to weather, to climate, to views and opinions of others, to identities. And so the apparent here and now reality is not trying to find yourself as a permanent person, because you can't do it. When you let go of everything, it means you're relaxed. You're not trying to get samadhi, get enlightened, trying to get nibbana, trying to become a good Buddhist, trying to get something, trying to get rid of bad thoughts. That takes a lot of effort, to try to control the mind, control your emotions, using meditation as a form of control, of trying to get something that you've been told is desirable, like samadhi or jhana, trying to get things that you read about in scriptures. And you can notice, in my own experience, I've noticed this in my beginning years of meditation. It was all about grasping. I could just reflect on it. I want to get enlightened. You had to get samadhi. So samadhi in my vocabulary was a foreign word, but it's elevated to a point where it's so important. It's something you've got to get before you can get enlightened. And so trying to get samadhi, jhanas, trying to get rid of defilements, kill your kilesas, get rid of the bad things in your mind. Don't be emotional. All kinds of conviction about trying to control the environment. I'm meditating, don't make any noise. I can't meditate in a monastery where there's a lot of things to do. I've got to go by myself off to a cave in the Himalayas. Is an ideal. There's nothing wrong, but it's still operating from ignorance. So witnessing, like the Buddha is the witness of Dhamma, of the way it is. So that's mindfulness, awareness. Conscious awareness is Buddha, because you can reflect on the way you're conditioned to see meditation. You're conditioned to, that nibbana is something rare, very few people and throughout history have realized nibbana. It's something precious. So what does that do to your mind? It's, when you see yourself as a body with emotions, with sexual desire, with anger, And according to the idea, these are obstacles to nibbana. You can't have sexual desire or anger, you've got to get rid of them. And so one tries to purify oneself by repressing, by forcing, using a lot of effort to control the samsara that you're experiencing, rather than awakening to the way it is. Samsara is like this. So it's like learning to trust Dhamma as apparent here and now. It's here and now, so it's consciousness, isn't it? Because you know you're conscious. At this moment, each one of us know we're conscious. But we see it in a very personal way. I'm conscious through the body, but I might become unconscious if I faint, fall in a faint on the floor, then I'm unconscious. Because we think of consciousness always in a personal way. I'm conscious. Consciousness is me. And when we're asleep, are we conscious because you're asleep? You're not awake. You can't be aware of your body or yourself. You might even have dreams. Fantastic dreams. So is consciousness dependent upon whether you're physically awake or asleep, dreaming, or is it apparent here and now? And in sleep, we're not aware of forms anymore. So it's very peaceful. Deep sleep is very peaceful. But it doesn't mean consciousness died. It means we're no longer grasping conditions, phenomena. So then, as I've pointed out many times, that consciousness has no beginning or end. Consciousness through the senses always has a beginning and an end. So sensory consciousness through seeing, through hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling, through thinking is very delicate and impermanent, unstable. The senses themselves are very unstable. And the objects that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, and feel are very unstable. So that whole relationship of subject to object is impermanent. It has no permanent quality to it, no absoluteness, no perfection. So even the best ideals are impermanent. So when we let go, then we're more aware of the here and now. We're aware of the environment, the society we're in. We can relate to the way it is at Amaravati through wisdom rather than through our ideas of what we think it should be. We can relate to monks or nuns in a way that is open and sensitive to the realities of the changing conditions you're experiencing, rather than forcing value judgments on everybody and conditions that we experience. is consciousness an experience? Can you experience consciousness? Sensory consciousness is all about experience. What we experience, what we see or hear, that's experience. So it's very, the sensory realm is all about experience. And so when we're letting go of experience, of sensory, of grasping the senses as our reality, is consciousness an experience. And if you call it one, then you're creating a condition of defining it as experience, because it's not, it's natural. It's nature. It's life. So when I say to you, you're perfect, your true nature is perfect already, then some people find that very confusing, because when you look at yourself as a person, I can't see myself as perfect as a person. You know, my personality is not perfect, and my body is certainly not perfect. You know, through meditation and through keeping the precepts and that, I've become a better person. Even my mother told me I was nicer as a monk than I was as a lay person. My mother's a devout Catholic. So you can improve your personality, yes, but still an improved personality is still, you know, impermanent. Sape Dhamma anatta, all Dhamma. Dhamma is not personal. So conscious awareness is Dhamma. It's not personal. And as soon as you make it personal, then you're caught in avijja, or ignorance, which always leads to suffering. So ultimately it's very simple. Is Nibbana something so precious and delicate that I, you know, with all my faults and flaws and tendencies, I don't feel perfect. I'm not a narcissist by nature. So I don't, as a person, you know, I know what my personality is. I've investigated. I know what Sakyaditi is. Through investigating it, not through trying to convince I'm perfect, because that would be another delusion, because the personal can never be perfect. But our true nature, the deathless reality of Dhamma, is apparent here and now and timeless, to be realized individually for oneself. So learning to, not to discard the intellect, but to no longer, you know, it's useful, can be very helpful, but it's a tool, it's not an absolute. There's no absolute right or absolute wrong. You know, forms cannot be absolute because they're impermanent, changing. where Dhamma is absolute, a reality. It doesn't change. No matter how the forms change, Dhamma doesn't change. And these forms manifest through Dhamma. So we begin to see them as Dhammas, like waves on a pond or the ocean. They're basically, you never lose perfect consciousness, no matter how sinful or bad you might believe you are. But when you identify with a wave, it doesn't last very long. It's not ultimately real. It's dependent on wind and other factors. Where Dhamma doesn't depend on anything. It's perfect, complete, is about the best words you can use to describe it. And that's our refuge. Dhammang saranang gacchami. It's not just a ceremony, a Theravada and Pali ceremony that we've adopted, but it has much more profound meaning than the words that we recite. Like, what is Buddha? So Luang Por Chah in that Thai forest tradition used the Buddha's name, Buddho, as a kind of mantra. To take refuge in Buddha is to be awake, one who is awake, aware of Dhamma, of the way it is. It's like this. Now, what's the meaning and purpose of life? And then we ask ourselves, what do we mean? Does life have a meaning? Is it purposeless? Is it meaningless? Is all my life I've tried to be virtuous and compassionate? Have I wasted my life because it's meaningless and has no purpose? Will I be rewarded when I die for being virtuous and compassionate? So what is that? When you investigate it, it's a sense of self. I'm trying to be very virtuous, keep the precepts, and then I expect to be rewarded with eternal life or nibbana or heaven or deva realm or whatever your perceptions might be. So even me trying to be virtuous, I listen to myself being a good monk, being a good Thai forest monk, being a credit to Ajahn Chah, me being somebody that has incredible gratitude and metta. And so as long as I grasp this sense of me being so good, when I look at that, when I can think that, but I can see it's just words, empty words. Is my life meaningless or purposeless? I can believe there's no purpose to it and it has no meaning, or I can believe there is some kind of ultimate meaning and purpose to our existence. I can believe we all have a purpose. Our life is full of meaning. It's always to become enlightened. Our purpose is to become enlightened people. Or is that just words that we've adopted? So in terms of ultimate reality, there's no purpose to it. It's perfect. Meaning doesn't mean it's an experience. It has no meaning. It's here and now. It's reality, it's life, it's love, it's perfection. That is not personal. And I remember going through, just playing with my mind, thinking all the identities I have about myself as a person, and listening to them. That's why I call it listening to your thoughts. So I could think anything. I'm the best person in the whole world, and I could see that was just empty phenomena. Or I'm the worst person in the whole world. I'm a fake, a phony. And just by observing these words and not grasping them, just letting them go. Or I'm just an ordinary bloke. I'm not special. I just try my hardest to be a good monk and be a good citizen and obey the laws and be a good member of the Sangha. Is still empty phenomena. Well, no matter what I think about myself, from the most absurd extremes to the being fair and mediocre, it's all empty phenomena. And then through this, you realize you let go of trying to find out who you are through perceiving words, by definitions, by conceptions, and letting go of all conceptions. And then you realize Dhamma, perfect, apparent here and now, timeless, deathless. So that's a realization. And it's not something delicate and remote, and only the finest human beings can realize it. Because that's empty phenomena too, and when we reified Dhamma as something very precious and difficult, or Nibbana as something attainable as a person. Like in Thailand, you hear about which monk has attained Nibbana, who is an Arahant, who isn't an Arahant, and all this goes on and on about using words to describe what we think about others, without realizing that we're just joining the crowd of ignorance, human beings, of not being awake, aware of the way it is. And I remember once reading, I think it was in Visuddhimagga, something, I forget where I found this quote, but there's the path, but no one's on the path. And I thought, that's depressing. There's a path, but no one's on it. And so I thought, what's the point, of even trying to get on the path? And then through investigation, you realize nobody's on the path. You've let go of, there's no path to be on, because Dhamma is apparent here and now. And it's not a path. It doesn't go anywhere, but it's where you are at home. Luang Por called it his real home. Home is where you belong, where you're at ease, where you're relaxed, where this is our real home, is Dhamma, not these forms which change and are so delicate and fragile and impermanent. So I offer this as a reflection for this afternoon.